Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. I'll call this July 20th City of Sammamish Planning Commission meeting to order. Let's start out this evening with roll call. John Bachman.
Present.
Mark Boffman, I'm here. Mike Brusco.
Here.
Carrie Bosworth.
I'm here.
Syed Safavian.
Here.
And I will point out that Ajay Chakrapani is not here this evening so far, but we'll hope that he arrives. And we have a new commissioner joining us this evening, Sudhrani Sankara. Can you introduce yourself just for a second, Sudha?
I've been in Sammamish for the last 9 years.
Yep, and make sure you turn on your microphone when you talk. Welcome. There'll be a few more orientation things we'll pass along to you as we go.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, let's read the meeting accessibility statement.
The public is welcome to attend Planning Commission meetings in person at City Hall, 801 228th Avenue Southeast, or virtually through Zoom. In accordance with the latest public health guidance, masks are recommended but not required for in-person attendance. Public comments. Each speaker is allowed up to 3 minutes for non-agenda comment, 5 minutes if representing an organization, and 7 minutes for agenda public comment. For those providing comment through Zoom, once you have dialed into the meeting, please virtually raise your hand to indicate you would like to provide a public comment. Your mic will remain muted until you are called on during the public comment period. To give public comment via Zoom, join the webinar via the link https://us06 web.j/j/h28-226-487-94. To get public comment via mobile or landline telephone, dial the following number, US +1 253-215-8782, webinar ID H28-226-487-94#.
Thanks, Julian. Next is approval of this evening's agenda. And on the agenda this evening, our main business item is an introduction to the City of Sammamish economic development component of the comprehensive plan. This will be an early discussion. Anybody have any comments otherwise on the agenda? Okay, we'll call the agenda approved by common consent. Next, approval of the minutes from July 6th. Anybody have any corrections to the July 6th meeting minutes? Okay, no corrections, so the July 6th meeting minutes are approved by common consent. Next, public comment, non-agenda. I mentioned what's on the agenda for this evening, so do we have any non-agenda public comment? Welcome, Mary.
Hi, my name's Mary Wichter. I've been in Sammamish 23 years. So I was going to talk a little bit tonight on a couple things non-agenda. The first one is I missed the land use meeting, but for 2,100 affordable homes of any percent, you need about at least 3 to 4 times that to get the density and actually have the density work. So I think that instead of the numbers given in the packet, it should be about 6,500 to 8,500 units that you up, and a lot of that density should go in town center because it's the most suitable for reducing cars, reducing costs, getting people connected together by schools and facilities. And then I emailed 2 different emails today. It's for kind of looking ahead to the critical areas. You need to do the comp plan, the critical areas update, and the materials that I emailed are from 2016, 2003, and back to 1990. It's not that they're old and you throw them out. They really provide a really good basis, and I think it's the simplest basis to learn. So I did print tonight 2 of the maps that I emailed to you, and the first one is from the comp plan as it's currently adopted, and you can see here on the gray, which is on the left-hand side of the map, or the West Shores, that's where the steep slopes are. That's where it goes from 500-foot elevation down to about 30 feet elevation in a pretty quick thing. So you do have steep slopes there. And on the back side, for reading from the code or from the regulations, it says existing conditions, natural environment, natural features influence land use. Steep slopes limit development potential along with wetlands. So if you don't follow that, you can end up hurting the land, which happens in some places you've heard me talk about over the last 8 years of my advocacy. And then if you do follow them, you'll see some interesting things, like there's an aerial map over here where the trees are. If you see like where these circles are, you'll see that trees remain because those were used with the code. So if you look at this, you'll see steep slopes, and they're not mapped except for this, but they're done by definition. And then here you've got orange is erosion, landslide is dark red, and seismic is brown, and you can see where those lay. And you need to know where those shapes are and where they are, because it's a citywide map, but they're not everywhere. And the more that you know where they are and you respect those, then you'll understand places you should develop, places you shouldn't develop, where the higher density can be. And then erosion, landslide, steep slopes, which are part of landslide, and seismic, those are all part of geohazards. The city needs to have geohazard code. Right now we have the separate ones, and those need to get mixed together. And all that code needs to be part of the comp plan, and then it needs to be adopted under critical areas, and it needs to be in the development regulations, and that all has to simultaneously get approved and adopted by December 31st of 2024. So I know it seems like I'm starting this early, but it's actually been a long time in coming. The last critical areas updates were in 2013, and these maps are from 2003, and they're not going to redo maps because the soils and things don't change. So hopefully over the July, August time, you'll be able to read through some of the emails, because it's the thing that I think gives you the easiest thing to review. And then I printed some in black and white. The colors don't specifically get assigned to a thing, and there's only 6 pages in this whole thing. There's maps and the other thing that's 24 pages that I sent, and that's from King County 1990. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mary.
And we have one hand raised, Mr. Stickney. I'm going to promote you to panelist.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners. Paul Stickney, Sammamish, and welcome, Suda, to the Commission. I saw your interview the other night. I apologize for the fire hose approach to this, and I'd be happy to meet with any of you for all the details behind of it. Much of what I talk about is pretty concrete, and some is still in process and getting further refined. This ties together with the written comment that I turned in today, and these numbers are from a generational cycle of life perspective for economic and demographic and workforce needs in Sammamish. The numbers that the city is putting forth of roughly 2,100 affordable and 5,575 total units is low. The 2,100 numbers is awfully close for workforce housing, but there are 4 major categories within Sammamish that need market rate housing. One is counterintuitive. The first one is from 0 to 80% economic house ownership income levels. There's roughly 4,500 homes in Sammamish, and the vast majority of those are folks that own their houses and they are equity locked, and there's not market rate supply to stay when they choose to sell. We have about 6,600, and we is the King's we. We have about 6,600 homes that have AMI incomes between 80 and 150% AMI. We have about 4,300 homes in the community from 150 AMI to 200% AMI. And there's roughly 7,500 homes in Sammamish that make over 200% AMI. And my chart shows corresponding price ranges up to the 200% AMI. The needs internally over time are well over 10 times the 2,100. I'm not advocating that they all be met now by any means, but I believe there should be roughly 8,000 units added to town center or other centers as appropriate, in addition to the 2,000 affordable housing, and they can be done without creating traffic beyond what the town center FEIS calls for. Take a look at the June 7th, 2018 Planning Commission meeting of the industry panel. Look at the July 5th, 2018 and July 19th for Sammamish Homegrown. And then take a look at the Civic Web for June 13th, 2023, and you'll look and see that I turned in what's called Achieving Notebook and Enrich and Sustain in support of this. And happy to talk with any of you in a lot more detail. Appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Stickney, and we have no more hands raised.
All right, thank you. So let's move on to the next part of our agenda for this evening, which is our new business topic. And I see Mr. Jeff Arango is on here. So I'm guessing we're going to have some discussion about the economic development portion of our, adding an economic development section to our comp plan. So let's go ahead and get started. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Chair Bachman. Thanks for the opportunity to be here tonight. And hello, commissioners. Jeff Arango with Framework, and we're here tonight to talk about the economic development element, and in particular, some of the data from the economic development profile that we've been working on. So let me just share my screen here. Okay, great. So we have three primary meeting objectives tonight. The first is, as I said, to preview the draft economic development profile, review an initial analysis of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. This is one of our deliverables for the project, but what we're putting forth tonight is just kind of our initial take, and there's going to be a series of opportunities for input, starting with the council a couple of nights ago, with the commission and with the community that will inform the final SWOT analysis. And then we want to provide some opportunities for the Planning Commission to give us input on the direction of the economic development element. We have a Miro board that we'll pull up later to collect your feedback on that. And we're happy to share that after the meeting if you want to follow up on anything. So this will be the city's first economic development element. It is a required element under the Growth Management Act. However, the state has not provided funding for cities to move forward, so it's not technically required. However, the City Council has decided to move forward, and this project's being funded in part through a grant from the Port of Seattle. So the premise under the Growth Management Act, under RCW there at the top, is that it must establish local goals, policies, objectives, and provisions for economic growth and vitality and a high quality of life. And then the Washington Administrative Code provides a little bit more detail about what needs to be included, a summary of the local economy, which is covered by the economic profile, a summary of the strengths and weaknesses, which will also include opportunities and threats, and then policies, programs, and projects to foster economic growth. And I will just say, I think the premise is that the economic development element really gets tailored to each individual community. One of the things we'll show you tonight is some comparisons with other communities, and I think while those are interesting, there are certainly some communities that we will not aspire to be per se, and others that may be more in line with what Sammamish is looking for. So I think economic development can mean many different things to many different people. And I think, primarily people think about jobs and employment, the tax base, city finances, but it can also include things like placemaking and arts and culture that bring people to the community, provide opportunities for businesses and things like that. The education of your community, which Sammamish is very highly educated, which is a strong asset. But also the affordability of housing. If you're looking to locate a business in Sammamish and it's difficult for you to find employees that are able to find housing in proximity, that can be a challenge. The zoning and development code sets the parameters for how much land can support, commercial activity, and the development code as well. Commute patterns and transportation, so things like the lack of, transit service. Sammamish isn't the easiest place to get to up on the plateau. And then, of course, the overall infrastructure of the city. So there are a number of interrelated pieces in the comp plan that also kind of feed into economic development beyond just kind of the core, components of economic development. So now I'll share some of the input that we've received so far. And this is from a focus group we had with some community members. And as kind of an icebreaker, we asked respondents to take a guess about how many jobs there are in the city of Sammamish. It's roughly, a little less than 70,000 people, but this was the question we asked. We gave them 5 choices. I won't put anyone on the spot tonight, but I will show you what their responses were. Out of 8 responses, we had a pretty somewhat even distribution. The correct answer is 7,000. It's just under 7,000. It's like 6,700. And, 25% of the respondents got it correct. We also asked the same focus group to rate qualitatively what they see as current economic development opportunities in Sammamish. 5 stars would be excellent, 1 would be low. Most respondents responded 1 or 2, with a smaller proportion responding 3. It was a small sample size of only 8 community members, so keep that in mind, but it was generally a low score. And then on the right, you can see some of the things that they described as challenges, things like roads, capacities, kind of a sprawling city, people move here for schools and bedrooms, monopoly on commercial leases that might make it difficult for new businesses to break through, were some of the things that they identified. Back in November, we had the Planning Summit, which had a series of events. One of them was on the mixed-use centers, which is, in addition to the town center, or including the town center, are really the economic drivers for Sammamish. And there seems to be broad interest in more of a mix of retail offerings. One of the things we're going to be looking at when we get the state data that we had requested and have not received is be able to look at things like retail leakage, like how much of the very strong retail dollars in Sammamish are, headed out of the community and being spent elsewhere. But hardware store, clearly one of the things that people would like to see, restaurants, local businesses, breweries, things like that, places to hang out, see their neighbors and friends, and, pick up goods and stuff that they can't get in the city currently. Some of the challenges that were identified, not enough density, lack of character, traffic were the top ones. But, at least in the groups that attended that event, there seemed to be strong interest in kind of seeing some changes happen in the mixed-use centers, which, could help drive economic development in the city. There was some outreach that's also been done at the farmers market on economic development, and attendees were asked to place dots in certain categories of types of activities or retail offerings that they would like to see. First one we asked was around entertainment and really strong desire for cultural festivals and events, and that's something we heard also in the Planning Summit. More things to do, like art galleries, arcades, and indoor recreation, live music, cinemas, performing arts, also received a good number of dots. On the retail side, it seems to be, some smaller kind of scale, potentially local businesses like bookstores and specialty stores, but also pharmacies, drugstores, sports apparel, home and garden also received some votes. In terms of dining options, the strongest response was for casual restaurants, followed by cafes and coffee shops, and then food trucks and fine dining. But there does seem to be strong desire for more restaurant offerings in the city. In terms of groceries, people really like the farmers market, would like to see more specialty stores and cooperative grocery store. Neighborhood market received 11 responses, and that's something that also has a land use component, something that we talked about in the future land use map at our last meeting, is the potential to add some neighborhood centers deeper into residential neighborhoods that could provide, broader access to food and perhaps some walkability as well. Minimal lodging options currently in Sammamish, other than maybe Airbnb and things like that, but desire for hotels, vacation rentals, bed and breakfasts. I think now probably the closest places to stay in a hotel are, Redmond or Issaquah. And then for office space, which of course is a really kind of a dynamic issue right now coming out of the pandemic, but strong desire for some artisan studios, animal services, incubator space, and then some votes for flex office space, medical offices, and then general office space. And then finally, attendees were asked, what did we miss? Is there anything else that didn't fit into any of the categories that you would like to see? The highest result was a bakery. Someone responded they want to see a balance between the natural and built environment, and then a number of other things, including a senior center, bowling alley, UPIC CSA farm, which could be pretty cool. So kind of a variety of things. I think this indicates that, the economic development element can really be a driver to improve the quality of life and bring some of the goods and services and cultural events that people would like to see in the city, and can also, help to build the city's tax base and shore up the city finances. So now we'll move into previewing the economic profile, and this will be posted in the coming weeks on the project website. And we will also include, again, an analysis of the data we'll be getting from the state once we receive it. But right now, there's 6 components to it. There's a resident profile, which is just about residents within Sammamish. There's a resident worker profile. So these are people that are employed, that live in Sammamish. Most of them work outside the city. A few also live and work in the city. Then the Sammamish worker profile are those that just work in Sammamish. Profile on households, neighboring cities, which is, cities in proximity. Some are wildly different, like Bellevue and Redmond, which each have over 100,000 jobs. Some are a little bit more similar. And then we pick some peer cities, which are cities that we think represent similar qualities to Sammamish. So, being a largely residential community, smaller amounts of commercial areas, probably less jobs. And for that, we chose Newcastle, University Place, Mercer Island, and Normandy Park. And I would say, having gone through the data and looked at the comparison, I think we did a pretty good job of picking those cities, and we'll go through some of that data here tonight as well. So some of the findings from the resident profile, as I said earlier, and probably well known, Sammamish residents, very highly educated, huge asset. Higher rates of undergraduate and graduate degrees than King County as a whole. For many of these pieces of data, we looked at the city and King County as a whole, or in the case of the peer and neighboring cities, comparing Sammamish to those, which is really pretty interesting. One of the findings that I really was not aware of before we put this together is just how much Sammamish lacks 20 to 34-year-olds. If you look over here on the right, the green bar represents Sammamish and blue represents King County as a whole. So in the 25 to 34 category, Sammamish is at 8% versus 18.1% as a whole. Once you get to 35 and older, the script kind of flips. Sammamish has more residents in those categories than King County as a whole. So it'd be interesting to kind of unpack why that is. I think there's some obvious things that we would consider, such as, maybe for folks in those age groups, Sammamish, maybe doesn't have all the offerings that they would like for their current lifestyle, or the other likely factor is just the cost of housing and being able to afford, even a less than median priced home in Sammamish would be difficult. Sammamish has a high proportion of children under 18, 47.3% compared to 30.3% in King County as a whole. So because of the strong schools, I think is obviously a big factor there. People are drawn to Sammamish, as well as its high quality of life. And then Sammamish has a high proportion of Asian residents, 33.3% compared to 18.7% in King County as a whole. Sammamish and King County as a whole have a similar white population, but Sammamish has lower proportions of those identifying as 2 or more races, Hispanic or Latino, and Black residents. So the resident worker findings, these are people that live within Sammamish and, largely work elsewhere, but some do work within Sammamish. So a couple of things. One, about a quarter of Sammamish's residents are employed or work from home. So that's pretty interesting, and that'll be something we'll want to track coming out of COVID. And we have a chart on the next page that kind of shows the trend using decennial census information. The second one is just noting that King County has gained 350,000 jobs from 2002 to 2020. And I think the takeaway there is that just Sammamish is really part of a very strong regional economy. Certainly, Sammamish benefits from that, from the residents and their income, but I think there is also an opportunity to capitalize on it further, whether it's more retail and service offerings in Sammamish, or perhaps more jobs locally. I think there is some opportunity as we start to define our priorities and goals for the economic development element. Next one is that most Sammamish residents do not work in the city. In 2020, only 755 workers both lived and worked in Sammamish. We have a map on the next page that shows the in and out flow of workers. And then 57.6% of Sammamish residents that are employed commute more than 30 minutes, and most of them drive. No big surprises there, but a lot of people are commuting, more than an hour if you count both ways. 60% of employed residents commute alone, while 5.7% take transit and 7% carpool. Both of those were higher than I had expected. So I think that's a good thing and one that we could continue to build on. Okay, so the map on the left shows inflow and outflow of workers into Sammamish. This is from a census program called On the Map. So about 5,900 people commute into Sammamish, and 30,500 commute out of the city. And then this shows the trends of work from home, again, just using the decennial census information. Starting out at less than 1,000 in 1990, and admittedly, it was probably a lot harder to work from home back then, but it has gone up to just about 8,000. So a significant increase. I think before the pandemic, it was 15% or less, something like that. So it has gone up quite a bit, and we'll just have to kind of see how the long-term trends are. Keep going. And then the map on the left is another map you can get from On the Map, and it's just a dot density map that shows where people work. You can zoom in and zoom out. I understand it's probably a little bit hard to see, but you can see that the Sammamish workers, some of them do travel pretty far to get to their jobs. The highest location for Sammamish residents to work is Seattle, followed by Redmond, and then Bellevue, and then all other locations combined. Okay, Sammamish worker findings. So as of 2020, Sammamish had 6,758 jobs in the city. According to the chart on the right, the number of jobs increased slightly from 7,380 in 2019 to 6,758. And in looking at more specifics, it appears that most of that reduction was in administrative support and waste management, which is the highest category for workers at Sammamish at 20%, followed by 14% in professional, scientific, and technical services. That category has grown steadily over the last decades, and in 2020 accounted for almost 1,000 jobs. Household findings, population 67,475, almost 22,000 households, and a relatively large household size of 3, a little over 3. Just less than half of Sammamish families have 2 income earners, so about 50%. Almost 50% of households have an annual income of over 200,000, with the median being about 195,000. 7% of households fall below the federal poverty level. And the rate of homeownership in Sammamish is very high at 86.3%. 6.1% of low-income households are severely cost-burdened. However, almost half of renter households are experiencing cost burden, which is a much smaller percentage than the home ownership, but still, significant for the renter population. So neighboring cities is pretty interesting. I think one of the big takeaways is just how few jobs Sammamish has to many of its neighboring cities. I mean, certainly Bellevue and Redmond. I mean, Redmond has 100,000 jobs. Bellevue has 150. So, maybe not an apt comparison, but even when you look at the other cities, Sammamish kind of stands out. And in particular, it stands out because the population relative to jobs is, it's a big gap compared to some of the other cities. We've done some analysis of commercial land values and improvement values and find that Sammamish is generally lower than the neighboring cities. Commercial land values in Sammamish are lower, particularly than Redmond and Bellevue, for obvious reasons, but you can certainly see kind of the increase in values, or the fairly high values in downtown Redmond, which is, experienced significant change over the last, decade plus. However, lower commercial land values could provide some economic opportunity compared to other locations because, it should be cheaper to purchase and leverage. Sammamish has the highest median income of its neighboring cities and its peer cities, so higher than Mercer Island, Bellevue, Redmond, all which have high incomes. The second highest is Snoqualmie at 171,000. And then when looking at population growth, percentages, Sammamish is generally on par with its neighboring cities, even accounting for annexations. Bellevue, I think, is a bit of an exception. In the last 10 years has seen a little bit more aggressive growth. And I think a lot of that is because they've been putting housing and growth in some of their former industrial kind of manufacturing areas, as well as in downtown. So the scale of development is just, much larger than what we would see or expect in Sammamish. Okay, this is a map that we put together, and it looks at land values per acre, and it includes both the land and the commercial values. And this is a form of kind of economic analysis that's well known by a company called Urban3. They're like an urban planning economics firm. And traditionally in economic development, cities would typically look at total assessed value, right? So you took a Walmart or a big box store, the total assessed value is probably quite high, and it might be generating, quite a bit of tax revenue. But one of the things that they did was to look at it differently and look at the land value per acre, which gives you a sense of how productive it is. And so the map shows commercial properties in red and residential in green. The spiky points are the properties with the highest land value per acre. And those are typically, in downtowns and urban areas. And what this is an indicator of is sort of land productivity, as well as the costs that will need to be provided, to provide services to these developments. And it's somewhat a sign of sort of fiscal stability. And you can see that Sammamish, while it does have some moderately spiky points in kind of the town center Inglewood area, it's generally relatively flat. The other thing that stands out is there's just a lot less red area than you do see in the neighboring communities. So we have less commercial area, and generally that land is, less economically productive. And the graphic on the right is trying to demonstrate that you can't really have all three of those goals in a sort of urban or suburban environment, maybe in a rural environment. But if you want stable services, you want low density, and you want low taxes, those are difficult to provide. So for what it's worth, this is, I think, something we can use to inform our discussions and our strategies going forward. And there are some refinements we're looking at in terms of the data. For example, if you're wondering what this is, this appears to be an error from King County. It's identified as an open space parcel in Klahanie as being commercial and apparently having a relatively high value, even though it's not developed at all. So we'll clean that up. And then the peer cities, as I said, I think, our big takeaway was the peer cities do seem pretty similar. And I'll just kind of note a few things. Normandy Park and Newcastle actually have quite a few less jobs than Sammamish, but their population is quite a bit less as well. When you look at job density, Sammamish is just ahead of Normandy Park, which is also, quite a residential community. And then in jobs per capita, so jobs as a percent of the population, Sammamish is the lowest among the peer communities. Mercer Island is the highest at 27%. And I think that that's largely because of their town center, where they do have some office buildings and, things like that, that contain employment. Okay, now we'll go over, again, our initial take on the strengths and weaknesses, largely driven from the data that we just presented, in addition to the other pieces of the profile. So I think, Sammamish has a number of strengths, the high median household income, strong purchasing power. And I think once we get a handle on how much of those dollars are traveling outside of the city, we could think about strategies to keep them in the city and drive, fiscal sustainability for the city, as well as provide more of the retail and service offerings that the community would like to see. very high educational attainment and the high quality schools, really strong assets. Overall, the high quality of life, Sammamish is consistently rated a great place to live, even I think in some cases by national publications. So we can't discount that. And it's, part of a really strong regional economy that we can draw upon. So we expect there'll be other strengths that get added, but that's kind of our initial list. In terms of weaknesses, I think some of the things I just said previously on the land value per acre slide is, there's just a limited amount of commercial land. So the green areas, the residential areas are having to do a lot of the heavier lifting in terms of providing the tax base for services. The lack of transit service, is a bit of a challenge, but the city is working on a transit plan. Relatively isolated from surrounding communities due to topography and limited transportation connections, which I suspect is what some people like about living here. But it does make it a little bit challenging in terms of locating a business or getting here. There's been limited economic development planning to date in the city. Something we're starting to correct with this effort. But if the city has further efforts that spur out of this, that can continue the momentum. I think over time. The high housing costs are a challenge, particularly for employees, trying to attract employees to local businesses. The lack of generally housing options, predominantly single family and predominantly expensive. Challenges competing with Redmond and Issaquah for retail dollars. And then the large outflow of workers, which also I think contributes to workers spending money outside the city. Some of the opportunities, one which I haven't previously mentioned, but there is a higher number of work from home jobs in Sammamish from the data. And right now, most of those jobs are still associated with a physical address outside of the city. So, under things like the Growth Management Act, where we're required to accommodate a certain number of jobs, we don't really get credit for those. And we kind of liken it to the earlier days of online shopping when the purchase of something online was associated with where you purchased it, where the source of the sale was. So if the retailer was located in Michigan, you paid their sales tax, and now you pay your local tax. And there could be a similar effort around jobs and how those are located. So we'll see how that kind of plays out. It's something we want to track. The town center planning has been kind of the primary economic strategy for the city. There's still, quite a bit of build out that needs to happen there. Opportunities to refine the plan if we desire as well. We could develop sub-area plans for the mixed-use centers, which would really, I think, help flesh out what the community would like to see, provide opportunities for more engagement with the community and with business and property owners in the area. And then I think we could also plan for support and amenities for work from home jobs. So the needs of residents may be changing as they spend more time, working from home. Could create a desire for more like third places, things like coffee shops and co-working spaces maybe. So that's something we should look at. And then some of the threats, declining school enrollment. I don't think Sammamish has fared as bad as some of the neighboring communities, but it's definitely a bit of a concern. And that, might be due somewhat to, longer term impacts from COVID, but also due to the high housing costs. Continued lack of young workers able to afford to live in Sammamish. The broader kind of tech industry layoffs and downturns, which has seemed to slow down, but is definitely something that was a bit concerning for a while. City of Sammamish fiscal sustainability, which is something the city is actively working on. And then the global potential for a global economic downturn, which, some of the predictions for a recession seem to be waning, which is good news. And then finally, climate change is going to provide a myriad of challenges, including to potential economic development activities. And then I think this is the last slide. We just wanted to highlight again, this is a slide we showed at the last meeting, but Sammamish's job growth target is relatively modest at 728 jobs. We do believe we have the capacity to accommodate that now. And if we do move forward with sub-area planning for the mixed-use centers, there would be an opportunity to look at expanding that capacity potentially as well to provide more opportunity for local jobs. And I'll turn it back over to the chair for questions and discussion. And then once we're finished with that, we can go to I'll pull up a Miro board and we can collect your own feedback on what you think some of the inputs for the SWOT would be. So thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Let's just dive right into questions and comments. I'll just start right here with John. What do you got, John?
I'm the only guy on the right side, so I get picked on.
Is that right directionally or right just being right or wrong?
So as previously noted, we have pretty limited retail and commercial space available today. I think I saw only 4 locations listed in the Commercial Brokers Association site. And I noticed in the town center open house that someone snuck in a hardware store sign into one of the slides. I think that'll be a big hit if we could ever get Ace or someone else back. The economic development stuff is really tricky for the city of Sammamish because obviously we don't want big box stores. We're not going to get an auto row, which would have great income potential for the city, but take up a lot of space, and it's just not in our cards, I don't think. So I guess some of my questions are, we've seen comments about business incubators. Has there been any thought of talking to Central Washington University about some sort of business support activities? I know Bellevue and Bellevue College, well, what used to be BCC, partnered at one time for that sort of thing. And then, you know, for the really big stuff, you've got national site selectors out there. They're not, I can't imagine they'll be looking at Sammamish, particularly for like a big box store. But the smaller stuff, my question is, would an ED manager, whether it's a staff position or contracted, help with trying to attract businesses, whether they're here or we steal them from someone else? For example, the motorcycle, the Harley Davidson motorcycle, there was a big tug of war between Kirkland and Bellevue over that one. And the ED managers had a big role in that. There's also the potential, if it's still happening, to participate with the regional economic development managers, whether that's one of the planning staff or an actually dedicated economic development manager, just to get a pulse on what's going on in the rest of the world here, in our corner of the world, I guess. So more questions really than answers here. Town center is going to help open up some more retail space, smaller scale stuff. But what we attract to bring into that right now is largely sort of free market. Whether or not the city wants to step in and help things remains an open question, particularly given the limited economic resources we have for going forward. I think that's all I've got. Thanks.
Can I actually respond to some of those? Because I think those are really good questions. And some of these I think we can actually add to the Miro board that we have on the screen here. The first one was the incubator partnering with Central Washington University, and I think that's something that can definitely be explored and then further discussed with the chamber on developing businesses and the type of support that is needed. So I think that is an opportunity, and it's maybe a question that gets further vetted through our work with the chamber. The second question on an economic development manager, I I think that is a challenge because we don't have any resources allocated now. Now, it's not to say in the future we wouldn't have those resources, but it is a challenge if we were to adopt this comprehensive plan with an economic development element, that how do we actually move it forward if we don't have any staff? So I think we need to acknowledge that challenge here with the city, and making sure we strategically think about how we implement this element. And then the last question on regional partners. We have been involved working with the Port of Seattle. They're actually funding this work as part of a grant to do this economic development element. But part of that is to collaborate and work with our other neighboring jurisdictions. The port facilitates those conversations. So we meet on a quarterly basis to generate ideas, to talk about what other cities are doing in those plans, to really network on how we can look at economic development as a regional solution, not just as our siloed city solution. So there is some of that's currently happening, but I think when we have that staffing and that resources, that could definitely expand. So we want to make sure we have the right fit for economic development in the city. I think that makes sense. But I'm hoping that some of these things that you brought up, Commissioner Bachmann, we can actually add to the Miro board, because I think that those are really great questions that we need to include in our SWOT.
Can I move on, Jeff? Do you have any response to any of that?
No, you can move.
Okay, Mike, we'll go down the line here.
Okay, thank you. Actually, I have first the question in terms of the comparable cities. How much would Mercer Island be a reasonable model? Their sort of town center area, you noted, has a fairly high value for the land, the commercial properties. And I'm wondering how their tax base, for example, compares, income levels, all of that I would assume would be somewhat similar. So maybe there's some things we can learn from, or at least model or understand our boundaries, how much we can acquire through some of the developments in town center if we take a look more closely at Mercer Island. And Jeff, is that something that you could comment on now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we chose for that same reason that you described. I think their town center, is I think a good example of perhaps what Sammamish could expect when theirs is built out. So they have a little bit of more older development there as well. But town center is residential, good schools, high incomes. So I think it's a great comparison. I think Newcastle also made a more comparison in its current state. Mercer Island might be something that maybe choose to aspire towards. Newcastle's very similar, and I have actually done some economic development work in Newcastle, but they are playing their sort of downtown, within where their main shopping centers are at, and they face some of the same challenges and consolidated ownership, not a lot of intra-development, so forth. So I think maybe less something to aspire to be, but a similar community as it is today. So definitely agree that Mercer Island, has some similar qualities as what Sammamish is looking for.
The reason that I was asking about this, and this probably ties in a little bit with the financial stability or sustainability for the city as well, is to understand, kind of where we can get to if we do good economic development planning. And how much will that help our tax base? So that's part of what was behind that question. In terms of some of the strengths, opportunities, so forth, I do think that there's an opportunity, and it was briefly mentioned, I think, of working much more collaboratively with the Chamber of Commerce, and really having a strong and working towards a strong partnership with the Chamber of Commerce. I know you mentioned this in the the draft list of, strengths, but with the high income in Sammamish, there's got to be some ways that we could tap that. And some of the things like cultural events, a lot of those tend to be, show up at a free concert in the park or that sort of thing. So might be fun to have, but if we can't in some ways pull money out of those types of events, so maybe that's one of the challenges is some of the things that are listed like, cultural events don't necessarily pull in much in the way of revenue. And I also think that, it was mentioned briefly, but a real opportunity is to somehow figure out how to tap the amount of people that are working from home in ways that, add to our tax base through, whether it's some small activities or lunches out or whatever. That's something that we need to investigate and see how other cities might be doing. I don't know what the answers are, but there's clearly an opportunity to help keep the dollars in Sammamish rather than having them flow out to other areas because people are working elsewhere. So that's all I have for right now.
Carrie?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Something I was thinking about is there a way to improve our existing commercial areas in the short term? For example, make them more about discovery or gathering rather than just destinations. So for example, like our Safeway Plaza against the stores is actually quite pleasant in terms of like the architecture and there's a bit of seating. But then on the street side next to the Habit Burger, there's an empty lot or empty, it just has grass on it. And it's kind of an eyesore. And in Bothell, in similar places, they have these like pop-up stores that are kind of on this lot that is, sort of to be determined what they're doing with it. So is there a way to add a bit more commercial to our existing commercial in a temporary fashion to provide kind of a place to gather, but also do a bit more shopping? So it's just some thoughts I had. So thank you.
Yeah, that I definitely see that as an opportunity. I mean, I think infill within the shopping centers or vacant properties. I'm familiar with the program in Bothell, and we do quite a bit of kind of temporary interventions, whether it's sort of public space or retail opportunities. So I think that's definitely something to look at. And the great thing about that is you don't have to wait for some multi-million-dollar development. It can be pulled off relatively easily and can be a gathering place and a social space for people in the community as well.
All right, Suda, no pressure. This is your first opportunity to comment as a planning commissioner. So yeah, don't worry, we're all listening.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Jeff. So it was an awesome presentation, and I really enjoyed that. And I learned a lot, too, today. I do have a couple of questions, simple, nothing major like Mark's questions. But the 24 to 34-year-olds are only 8% in Sammamish. Is it because of lack of interest? Is it like sleepy town, or is it affordability? Do we know?
Well, yeah, good question. I would say I don't know the answer, but I would suspect it's a combination of those two. But the other thing that concerns me is, let's say it's more of a lifestyle thing, right? And those people may be drawn to Sammamish. I mean, the cost of the median house has almost doubled, so the ability to live in Sammamish has gotten more challenging. So it'd be interesting to see if those trends change at all as a result of that.
Okay, thank you.
I will say I have a 23-year-old who works in Sammamish and lives in Seattle, Wallingford. So I really think the cost of housing is an issue. However, that age group, until they change their lifestyle a little bit, they're just not going to be super motivated to live in Sammamish. There's just not enough for them here yet. Someday, maybe, but
Eventually.
yeah, maybe. Oh, okay. So last in the row before me is Syed. What do you got down there, sir?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jeff, very nice presentation and a lot of information, and thanks for educating us. I have a couple of questions before getting to making some statements. One of the first slides, Jeff, that you showed us was about what is economic development, and had a list of issues, and environment was not a part of it. Any reason?
No, it probably should have been on there. I think my intent was just to show that economic development is more of a holistic things than just the things you might think of. And I absolutely agree. Environment would be appropriate to add as probably a number of other things.
Well, the environment affects the economic development affects the environment. So I think that should be there. Question about employment in the city is 7,000. What year is this? 2020?
2020, yeah.
Yes?
Yeah, 2020 is
Right.
the data point.
Do you have the breakdown on that?
By industry or?
By type. How much is retail? How much is, generally speaking?
Yes, we do. I don't have it right in front of me right now. It will be in the ED profile, but I can say from the previous slide that the highest is 20%, which is administrative and waste management. And then the second, I think, is at 14%, which is the sort of science and technology professional category. So I don't have that full information, but it will be in the profile once that's released.
Also, as far as getting input and from the public, you mentioned, which is really is good, talking to the people at farmers market. But what is your experience in other cities? Don't you get involved in a project that the city requires to do some phone interviews or the surveys of the public in general? I mean, farmers market is great, but that. I saw the sample is so small, so I don't know if we can make general statements that that's a position of 67,000 people in the city.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we've done a number of things. One, the planning summit was 5 events in the fall. And again, one of them focused on mixed use centers, which wasn't directly on economic development, but it was tied in. We also had a focus group, and we're continuing to do additional focus groups. So we have a technical advisory committee, and then another focus group that we're going to be having in August. We've talked about doing a focus group with development community. And we have a survey out on the project website for economic development. So we would really encourage all of you to participate in that as well. So the farmers market is just one of a number of things that we're doing, in addition to working very closely with the Chamber of Commerce.
You gave us some information about comparing the cities with the comparable cities, nearby cities and other cities. I agree. I think John, he was the one that mentioned that Mercer Island has much more similarities with Sammamish than which city you used, I believe, down south. Where was that?
University Place, maybe?
No, Normandy Park. Normandy Park has a substantially small population, a few thousand, isn't it? So
It's
why we
substantially
picked up
smaller.
that city?
I think primarily because it's a predominantly residential community at this stage. So that was the primary reason that we chose them. And not to say that, every comparison city is something that we aspire to be. I think we're just looking for some different bookends to compare it to. So.
You show a statement from WAC as far as the obligation of cities to provide and include economic development as a part of their plan. There was a statement, if the city claimed itself as a residential city, residential community. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so there is that provision in there. Interestingly enough, residential community isn't defined in the Growth Management Act, so I would have to do more research, but I suspect it's communities like Woodway, if you're familiar with Woodway, that are like pretty much almost like 100% residential. So I could check that, but regardless, I think the city council's decided it's a priority, whether it's required or not.
Is this to our advantage, if we claim to be residential, or disadvantage as far as economic development?
Well, if the city is not interested in economic development being a priority and was not interested in doing an economic development element, and the state provided funding in the future that would force the cities to go forward with that, then I suppose it would be a benefit. But the indications we've gotten from the council is that this is a priority for the city.
You gave us a lot of breakdown as far as the population. Jeff, what's the overall population as far as by age group? I understand, if I'm not mistaken, that we have a lot of older, percentage of population of older people in here is more than the other cities or nearby cities. Is that right?
Well,
Not the breakdown like.
Yeah, you should be able to see my screen here, which has the chart. Are you able to see this?
Yeah, we can see it. And I would say, Jeff, you talked about, you didn't really talk about one thing, which I think is kind of what Syed's getting at, is if you look down at the bottom few rows there, we're kind of ahead of everybody on all of those categories.
Well, not actually.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's reversed. Yeah, actually, we're behind.
Yeah, we're behind. I think this is what stood out to me.
Yeah.
Is we have a high percentage of 45 to 54. So not like, so anyways, there's a cohort of folks in that age group that'll be moving into these other categories. So that could increase over time, but right now we're generally trending below the category of the county, certainly in the 65 to 74, where,
Maybe if you convert these bar charts into some pie charts, that would be a little bit easier to understand these differences.
Sure. You can do that.
As far as economic development, I don't know how much of commercial land right now is available.
In the city?
Do we have a lot of opportunities? Is it a matter of marketing the city, or is it a matter of not enough land for commercial activities to actually to happen?
Yeah,
or both?
Excuse me. There's also, there's, quite a bit of development that has to happen in the town center. So there's some opportunities there, but there's relatively consolidated ownership there, I believe, in some respects. I think the bigger issue is that the limited commercial land that is in Sammamish is already developed, right? It has existing uses. Because there's not a lot of it, it probably does pretty well. There could be low levels of debt because it's older developments, and that's something we found in similar work when we've talked to shopping center operators about redeveloping. They're like, well, we're profitable, we have no limited debt, and this is kind of the business that we operate. So sometimes that can be a limitation. But I do think if there was a commercial property owner that was more interested in redeveloping their site, then I think that could afford a lot of opportunity, because those sites are generally underdeveloped even to what they could do under current zoning. And as we discussed earlier, there's opportunities for infill. A lot of those shopping center sites are parking lots. Maybe all of that parking, doesn't get used at all times. So there could be some opportunities for infill, but there isn't a lot of, undeveloped land that's waiting to be developed other than, in the town center.
Aside from retail kind of economic development, how about other opportunities that you may see fit in the city? Culture, social, environmental, recreational, tourism. Yeah. I mean, I think those are all opportunities, and I think those can be integrated, right? I mean, with any type of development, I think there's the opportunity to add housing as well. I mean, none of the existing mixed-use centers other than the town center really have any housing within them, even though zoning allows it now. And I think, a lot of shopping areas are really emphasizing more the experience, right? So, if you go to like Totem Lake or some of the newer developments that we've talked about previously, there is an emphasis on public space and amenities and places to gather and, cultural offerings and events. And I think that's really kind of more the future of retail than it is just sort of going to pick up something you have to get, although that's always going to be a part of it. So, yeah, I do think the whole cultural piece of it is really important, and those mixed-use centers in the town center are the places that have the potential to provide that. Also, in your analysis, you made reference to the low value, land value in the city as comparing with the other cities. What do you think? What is the justification? What's the reason for it?
Yeah, so just to be clear, land value per acre does include the improvements value. And I think, the whole premise of that analysis is that even a relatively modest, take a little building in downtown Issaquah, right? A 2-story building that fills its own lot, that's, filled with tenants and is, actively being used is generally on a per acre basis going to be more productive economically and provide less cost to serve it, than a big box store or a sprawling shopping center. So I think it's really that Sammamish's commercial properties are underdeveloped compared to its peers. And development that's more like the town center or, maybe like the Met Market development is generally going to be much more economically productive and cheaper to serve.
So the basic principle of supply and demand doesn't apply to this, right? So we don't have that much demand. That's why the cost of supply is less. Is that a good assumption?
I think there is more demand than Sammamish is providing. And that's why I think, obviously, that the state data that we're going to look at is interesting. But I think we're going to find that, there is just lots of dollars being spent outside the city for obvious reasons, right? And so if you can create those experiences and the reasons to go, go to the mixed-use centers for an event and have dinner or do some shopping, there's an opportunity to capture those dollars, whereas people now may, go to Kirkland or go to Issaquah or go somewhere else to do some of those things. So I don't think it's necessarily a demand issue. I think it's actually more of a supply issue. There isn't those offerings in the community, and I think the town center has been planned to provide that, but it's still in progress.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. So I have a couple of sort of questions, comments, Jeff, and then I have a few things I'd like to see if you want to add, or maybe you can decide if they're worthy of adding to your list there. But first off, I'd say I think it's probably worth saying out loud that this is a 20-year plan that we're working on with the comp plan. So, when we talk about some of this stuff, we have to remember that it's not things that we're necessarily thinking are going to happen next year. But, if we do some small area planning or do some other things in the future, some of this commercial discussion might fit in differently than what it does now. So I think it's just important to kind of say that. One of the questions I have is, when we think about all of this as we move forward, should we be thinking about it as with the town center included or post-town center build out? And I say that because, the state of the city from the standpoint of retail and commercial spaces will be likely quite a bit different, and the numbers will certainly look different after the town center is built. So are we developing a plan that's focused on post-town center, which with a 20-year time horizon, would be, or are we saying, in addition to what we expect will happen with the town center? I think those are just two very different scenarios, and we should be clear with our own discussion about what we're thinking through.
Yeah, Kelly, please chime in if you have anything else to add. But I would say that we want to obviously think about the town center as a big part of this effort, but I think until it's fully built out, I think we still have an opportunity to potentially influence how that happens. So I think, the town center is more part of a discussion than it being sort of a post-town center discussion. Although I think that's where a lot of the effort is, because we haven't, the city hasn't done as much thinking about it, whereas a lot of thinking and effort has been put into the town center to date.
Yeah, I agree. I think we have a town center that's really on the cusp of seeing it being built out. And what I mean by that is we have a lot of land use applications that are currently under review, which will then lead to site construction, which will lead to building. So that is on its way. And I think Jeff, or Chair Boffman, you brought up a good point. This is a 20-year plan. And when we look at economic development, we should also be looking at our land use and our housing. We should be looking at our job targets and our growth target. And what I mean by that is our growth target is 2,100. Our allocation of affordable housing is 2,100. So when we're looking at the type of services that we need to support that population, when we're looking at the type of housing and the type of build out, I think this gives us an opportunity to look beyond town center and look at that capacity in our other sub areas, if that makes sense. And so, yes, we should look beyond town center, knowing that town center is going to provide some of that, but it's not going to provide all of it. So I think that's where we start looking at Inglewood, Pine Lake, and Klahani, and then looking at it very holistically from not only economic development perspective, but also from a housing perspective and from a transportation perspective, and make sure that we're getting that balance for that 20-year horizon.
Okay. Next thing, because this is a new element in our comp plan, one of the things I did, rightly or wrongly, was I went and looked at some of the economic development components of like Redmonds and Renton and Issaquah, just a few of the others. And what I saw was, and I would encourage definitely the rest of the commission to, you can find them really quickly and kind of get a feel for it pretty quickly. It was an extremely broad range of what's included, what the level of detail is, all of that. And it made me think a little bit about, I would really suggest as we move forward, we spend a little time on what's right for Sammamish, how big of a component of the comp plan is this going to be? How much time do we have as we work on our comp plan to spend on this element? What's right-sized for Sammamish, given the fact that we're kind of starting from zero? But at the same time, I also saw many instances of things that were very overly generic statements, that really nobody will ever be able to create any kind of an action plan out of. They've used some buzzwords and filled in the blanks, but I really don't want to do that either, right? I think this needs to be the right size, but it also needs to have just enough meat in it that we can then take it and actually do a few things. Now, we may not have the resources to do a lot, but at least do a few things that can actually be actions that get taken. So anyway, I think, defining some objectives and working through a little bit of that guideline stuff so that we come out with an element in the comp plan that's useful, especially since the first one kind of always sets the standard of what's going to happen in the future. So this is our opportunity to try to do the right thing. Okay, so a couple of suggestions I had, and again, some of this stuff, it gets to be, the lines get blurred between describing it one way or another, so maybe you have some of these covered already. I'm actually sure you do. Strengths. To me, the fact that the community is largely considered one of the safest and cleanest communities in Puget Sound region, I think is very desirable. And what kind of goes along with that to me is we have good policing and excellent service from Eastside Fire and Rescue. So some of those services that are here are really a strength of the community. And maybe that fits under quality of life, I'm not sure. Weaknesses. Some of these I'll just warn you, some of these could be slightly controversial, but I think that one of the things that I've noticed for many years now is, and I don't know if you call this culture or what, but because of the large number of sort of young family / mid-range families, there's a lot of folks who, they commute to their job wherever, they come home, the garage door goes up, they pull in, the garage door goes down. There's not as much community engagement as there is in some places because of the nature of the culture here. I think that's something that we being able to draw people out into those community events is a big deal that could make a big difference in economic activity as well. Because, you go out to concert at the park and then somebody says, oh, let's stop for ice cream on the way home, which I shouldn't do anyway, but still sometimes do it. Internet access, we're talking about working from home and opportunities for some of those kind of things. And we have, as we've talked about many times, few choices for internet access, which is more and more critical for all of those things. And sometimes not the greatest service. How the city can affect that, I'm not sure, but I think it should maybe be on the list. And in a similar fashion, I know that a lot of people would probably say transportation. I'm a little on the fence about that, but I do think that the way that our city has a spine and everybody goes up and down 228th does create some challenges. And then the other one I had under the weaknesses category is that we have a history of not great cooperation between the business community and city government, or not always the staff, but maybe some of the other folks who are involved. And I really think that the opportunity here is for better cooperation between, whether that's the chamber or businesses in general and the city, to find common ground and common objectives and work together to, do things that complement each other. Okay, opportunities. We talked about Central Washington. I think the category should be partnerships. Partnerships with Central Washington, that feels like an opportunity that's not been capitalized on yet. I think in your presentation you had people going to Redmond and Issaquah for retail, and that's true, but I'm wondering if there's any way for us to cooperate with Redmond and Issaquah in a way that kind of helps all of us. I don't know what that might look like, but they are our neighbors. And then, of course, better partnership with the Chamber of Commerce. Threats. You kind of alluded to this at one point, but I think there's some very specific examples where lack of local ownership has been an issue for the community, where in particular, this is in the weeds, but in particular, a local business gets pushed out because a national real estate ownership firm has an agreement with a national retail chain, and so they push a local business out to replace it with a retail chain that maybe the community doesn't even care about. So somehow, at various levels, not just there, but at other levels too, local ownership is, the lack of local ownership is a threat, or it could be just a challenge. The other thing I think is that we will have to think a little bit about, I think, this element of the plan is more vulnerable to politics than others may be. And so the inevitable pendulum or lack of stability in, city politics, and that's not intended as a critique, that's what happens everywhere. But the swings back and forth in the environment of the political climate of the city can definitely be a detriment to people who want to have a business here. Businesses want stability and that they can count on, whether that's tax rates or rules and regulations or whatever it is. I think that is always a potential threat, and we shouldn't ignore it. So the more that we can build something that can be stable, regardless of how that works itself out over the next 20 years, I think that would be a wise move on our part. So, like I said, some of those may fit into your categories there, and maybe not some of them.
Yeah, those are great. Thank you.
Anybody else have some follow-ups? Go ahead, Mike.
All right. So building on some of those, one of the things that, back to the demographics chart, that could be maybe it's a threat or challenges that likely that the population, of course, will be aging, and if trends continue like they do in many, many places, we'll find fewer families with children, more in the 45, 50 and above, and they tend to spend less money, although they may have more disposable income and more freedom to spend it. So I guess one of the things to understand is that long-term demographic changes and whether those will provide some threats or perhaps some opportunities. But along those lines, one of the strengths is the number of families with children, and being able to provide opportunities that would pull the families out can really provide some economic stimulus. And then another one for strength is our parks. And that I don't think that was mentioned before, but in some way leveraging those parks, they're great assets. I think we can make some more use of them from a income standpoint for the city, and actually bringing people in. I know a lot of folks would go up into the Issaquah Highlands, or start out from Issaquah and go up into Tiger Mountain and all that. It actually brings a number of people in, so maybe it's more promotion to the parks or more parking for the parks, that sort of thing. So that's just a couple of additional ones that I thought were worth adding there. So thank you.
I'll go down the line here. Carrie, did you have anything else?
Sure, maybe just a few if you like to add. So for weaknesses like our connectivity or lack of walkability is one that we could work on. In terms of threat, kind of along the same lines as the others, is just trust, between the residents and the government, city government, and vice versa, and just all those things. And then opportunities, as I alluded to before, like infill. We have some infill opportunities and also going up opportunities. And then also out the strengths, I had destinations, but I was thinking parks, so we got that covered. Thank you.
Thank you.
Suda, did you have additional ones to add?
No, I don't have any additional ones.
Okay, Syed?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have two questions to you. Question number one, you made a reference to opportunities with Central Washington. Can you elaborate on that? What do you mean?
With the college, with Central
I
Washington
see.
University.
So you're
being in
talking
the
about a
building.
college.
Yeah, I mean, I think just like what John mentioned with Bellevue College, and that's a unique thing really in Sammamish, is having that Central Washington satellite campus. And if we could find
So what is the
ways to-
status of that Central Community College? The sign is there, but nobody's there. Somebody can tell me what's going on?
I would say it was a grand idea that is currently underutilized, and so that's why I would put it on the category of opportunities.
Also, you made reference to the 20-year plan and question about 20-year plan. That begs the question that all of us should be kind of looking into it. Should the economic development dictate the land use and the zoning, or land use and the zoning should dictate economic development?
I'm
You brought
definitely
it
not
up.
the person to answer that question.
You brought it up.
Well, I would say, and I think, Jeff and Kelly should answer that, but I would say that, like many things, we need to be mindful that the pieces and parts need to be married together thoughtfully. So you can't necessarily put, the chicken before the egg or the egg before the chicken. It has to be thoughtfully designed so that they work together, because otherwise, what's the point?
Also, I attended with my wife at the 4th of July event, and my wife was telling me jokingly, it looks like half of the city is in here today. It was so crowded, and that really tells us that so many people in here, they're eager to enjoy the environment, the climate, the parks, and the amenities that the city has. And we should really capitalize on this and kind of expanding marketing and encouraging the people and increasing the amenities and the facilities that these parks provide. So that should be really taken care of. Mr. Chair, also, you made reference that you look at the economic development of the other cities. And did you say that theirs overall kind of too vague, or the one that we are having in here discussing is too vague?
Yeah, I would suggest you should go look for yourself and see what
I'm
you
gonna
think.
look at it.
But what I did see is that I saw wide variability. Some were extremely vague, brief, and had, they made statements like, I'm trying to think of a good example, support job growth and stuff like that. How does a city do anything with that, right? If that's all it says, what do they do with that? So that's not enough. But then the one I do remember, Redmond, and we all know that Redmond is a hotbed of things going on, but theirs was 20 pages long and went into great detail and lots of graphics and was very thorough and detailed. To me, that's probably overkill for what we should take on or would need. But tons and tons of good ideas in there. So somewhere in the middle, the right size for Sammamish is what I think is appropriate. And I'm just encouraging people to go look at those so you get the idea of how it can be a footnote, or it can be a major component of the comp plan, and we have to choose the right way to do it for ourselves. Or we have to choose what to recommend to the city council they should do.
So where we go from here as far as economic development plan?
Where we go from here about with economic development? Well, we set some goals and policies as part of the comprehensive plan, and I think part of that vision, and Jeff, chime in here, is, how do we implement it? How do we keep it off the shelf, collecting dust? And how do we implement it? And I think that would require more planning and more strategy. So as part of this comprehensive plan, we really want to set ourselves up for success. So I absolutely agree with Chair Boffman that we don't want to be too vague. We want to be purposeful in identifying what economic development means for the city. We want to set ourselves up for moving into that next stage of planning, which is an implementation strategy. Jeff, do you have anything else to add to that, or did I miss something?
No, I think you said it well, and I think I agree with Chair Boffman too. I mean, our intent is to, kind of set the foundation for economic development, not overreach. I mean, the last thing we want to do is put together a set of lofty aspirations that we can't achieve. So I think we do want to keep it relatively simple, straightforward, and most importantly, achievable and appropriate for Sammamish. So I think it sounds like we're kind of in alignment in our direction, and we'll be coming back again probably in the fall to continue to work on this with you.
Could it be possible to break it down into phases, stages, short term, mid-term, long term, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years?
Yeah, I think that would be the implementation strategy. That would be that work. So how do we, and that would come after the comp plan is adopted. Similar examples are urban forest management plan, where we really dedicated the time to doing the plan itself. And then once that was adopted, we started working on how we implement it. And it gives us time to really consider the goals and policies, make sure they're the right fit, make sure they're not too ambitious, they're not, less ambitious. Sorry, it's late at night and I may have lost my words at this point, but we want it to be the right size for Sammamish. And this exercise that we've done here is just the beginning of that. Before we get into that implementation piece, and I know everyone gets so excited about that, but if we don't have any guidance, it makes that really hard. So we want to focus on the guidance, which is this element in those goals and policies. Where we go from here is we're taking this back, as well as the City Council's feedback on the SWOT, and we'll combine it. We'll continue with our focus group interviews, and then start working with the Chamber of Commerce, our advisory committee, to start shaping those goals and policies, and then bring a draft back to the Planning Commission in September for your review, and further vet that before it moves on to City Council. So we're right here at the beginning, and I think what we've done tonight is amazing. So if there's anything we missed on the 4 boards, let's get it added so we can combine that with all the other feedback we've received.
Yeah, I want to give John his second opportunity. I skipped over him, so go ahead, John.
First and last. I have to take a little bit of issue with Chair Boffman's drive into the garage and close the door and don't come out. I live close to Pine Lake Park, and I have tonight's concert in the park night, every Thursday night, right at our time. Normally I could sit on my deck and listen, but no, I'm here. But to get here, I have to drive down my street extremely slowly, because the entire community is walking down the middle of the street to get to the park. So the city has been extremely successful with those types of activities. I mentioned the 4th of July, just bang up successful. Weekly farmers market. So if there's ways that we can expand on that, partner with the chamber and some of these owners of these, the Pine Lake, for pop-up activities or something, I think there's a lot of hunger for that could sell more ice cream. So I think we've got a good start. There's opportunity for more, but also acknowledging that we've got to do it in a way that doesn't impact the city's finances too much. So that's all I got.
All right, thanks, John. Anybody else? Last opportunity. Okay, thank you, Jeff. This is actually, to me at least, super interesting, and I think a huge opportunity for the city. So great job, and I can't wait to talk about it some more. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate all the input. We'll make sure we consolidate this and get it rolled into what we're working on. So really appreciate it.
All righty. Thank you. Let's move on to agenda-related public comment. And so anything related to this topic we just got done talking about for public comment. Mary, are you going to make some public comment? Okay, let's start there.
Hi, good evening again. Mary Wichter, Sammamish for 23 years. Really great input. You guys are doing a lot of thinking, really great sharing. And whatever we do builds together. I appreciate all the staff input too and planning. I'm just going to respond to things that I heard. The first thing is Kelly Hilda, who's the deputy director, had said, yeah, we're going to do the comp plan. We're going to set those goals and policies. And Mark Cross used to be on council for 8 years and was mayor in 2007. He told me a long time ago, Mary, the comp plan is the guiding light. And if it's not in the comp plan, poof, it doesn't exist. So you should think on that. Like, I know there's the survey that I don't know if people have done. I just saw the board. If there's anything that you want, the goals and policies drive it, like all the changes, all the development stuff. So it's really important to make sure that we do either look at other people's city things or think about what's important to your family or your work or what you do or where you buy, and make sure that that gets in there, because this is the really important time to do it. And it was also stated we're planning for 20 years, but the comp plan, the first was in 2003. You're supposed to do them every 8 years, but the next one was like 2012 to 2015, and then this one they bumped you out a year, so it's 2024. And it is supposed to, 2024. It is supposed to go to the 2044 plan, and there's also a Vision 2050. But I think there's a 5-year status check, so I think the city actually has to kind of say what they're doing. So it is kind of like long-term, but it's really important to think about the things that go into it. And then on why we don't have a lot of 20 to 24 years old, I don't think there's probably a lot of people that don't go to college, but there are a lot of people that do. So you go to the high school and you get into college, or you try Bellevue College or Central Washington or maybe up in Bothell, and you try to do that, and then you kind of get in your major, and then you try to get a job, and then you can't afford a place to live. And when I first became an empty nester, I remember meeting a lady who I didn't know, and I said, I don't really know what to do. Do I downsize or whatever? And she goes, they'll move back. And so then I talked more, and I said, no, they're really doing fine, and I think I'll be fine. And she goes, they'll move back. And then she said that one more time, and sure enough, they each moved back for either to take organic chemistry at Bellevue College, or a break in between, or to save up apartment stuff while they were looking for a house or whatever. But I think that's very important. So I don't think you're going to see a lot of those people here. And I think Chair Boffman had actually talked about the things that you're interested in 2024. We don't have a lot of those here, so we're going to have that. We also are having declining school enrollments. I forget who brought it up, but we are an aging nation. We're an aging nation, we're an aging state, and we're an aging city. So everybody is getting older. People younger aren't getting married as much. They're trying to do work for jobs. They don't have as much money for a kid. They're either not having kids later or having less of them. And there are schools closing. Like I know in Bellevue, they were talking about what schools, they had 2 or 3 schools, and they had to close and coalesce them together. So I think that's important. Some of the things I've seen in the past, it was a number of years ago, there was actually a parade one time where like the kids and their bicycles like went from City Hall down to the center. Those are things that get people out. I grew up in Bozeman, Montana. We used to do the Sweet Pea Festival where you go to the park and people sell all their wares. There's a mile run that people would do, things that could be done. I know the city doesn't do a lot of activities. The other thing I've seen is I know some people that do the pay what you can type of meals. They don't have to be meals, but you could even have a festival that's free, like the Folklife Festival in Seattle. My mom used to come with her band every year. It's a free festival, but there's just an open donation box where you can put as little or nothing or as much as you want in there. I think those type of things could help. Somebody had asked, Syed, I think, had asked about how big Normandy Park is. I looked it up in 2021. The census for it was 6,773 people, so it is pretty tiny, but worth looking at. I liked a lot of the comments people had for doing different things, and I think probably the most important thing is, so in Bozeman, Montana, I do those meetings remotely as well because I'm from there and I still own properties there. They have a whole economic vitality committee. They have, in addition to the board of people that does that, they have an economic development plan, they have a strategic plan, and some of their most recent meetings, they talked about if you want to have a commercial center somewhere, you need to have about 3,300 folks that live in that area for it to have enough of the business going. Also, when you first develop things, if you try to do the commercial first, you end up at a net loss for the first 2 years because you just don't have the people to sustain that. And we've had some public commenters from the town center saying, you know, we just don't have enough people, we don't have enough of the density yet to really have the businesses move forward with that. So you need to think about that. So first of all, you have to allow the density, you have to allow the housing, you have to allow the building, and then your commercial's going to follow that. Very similar to if, you know, Issaquah Highlands, it first built up, there was no commercial, and there was a tiny bit of commercial, and then there was a little bit more commercial. And Klahani was a different thing. Klahani was a fully formed, so Paul Stickney speaks a lot. He said Klahani was the second master plan community. I believe Milk Creek was the first up kind of toward Everett. Klahani was the second. Klahani was about 11,000 people, and they had about 1,000 units of multifamily, where Sammamish only had about 1,000 units of multifamily. So Sammamish used to only be 6% multifamily, and then when we annexed in Klahani, we went from 6 to 10%, and then somebody wanted to compare us to Mercer Island, and you think we're really similar, but Mercer Island is already 25, working on 35% or more multifamily. We're still at the 10% because we just have so many of those big single-family homes. So I love the Urban 3 stuff that Jeff Arango, the consultant, had shown because it does that tax density per acre, and you can see just Sammamish is green and flat, and the reason that we're having problems with financial stability is we just don't have the things that bring in money, and you just have to tax everybody more, and you're limited on that. So we really can't get out of that. So what we really do need to do is work on the housing density and putting in the right places and making sure that it's in the compact centers where people can interact, where they can go. And then if you have one lot and it's 3 or 4 or 5 stories high, you're pulling tax dollars for that. And with mixed use centers, you have the same. They can even just be 3 stories and you have a lot more interaction. So a lot of the problems that we have is we grew in the steep slopes areas, but we had the citywide moratoriums on growth for 6 or 7 years and some water moratoriums. And because of that, we ended up with big sprawling mansions that are spread out everybody, and we need to go back to the center. So I think that's the thing that will impact the economic demographics the most. Thanks.
Thanks, Mary.
And we have one hand raised. Mr. Stickney, I'm going to promote you to panelist.
Have to turn off the fan. Good evening, planning commissioners. Paul Stickney, Sammamish. And by the way, I will say that Mary and I did not coordinate our comments tonight, but while I was listening to her, I had several things on my list that I could check off the box because she already said it. So appreciate that, Mary. A lot of good comments tonight, a lot of good thoughts. I'll respond to some of the things I heard as well about Mercer Island. They do have a town center, but it grew on top of a commercial center. So Mercer Island had a fairly decent sized commercial core to begin with quite a bit of jobs and some low-rise buildings, 2 and 3 stories. Then roughly in the 90s, early 2000, their town center redeveloped a portion of their downtown. And I do know a lot of facts, but I'm the first to say when I don't know a fact. So I'm going to do a random guess. I'm going to guess that roughly 20% of the area that was in the Mercer Island downtown got redeveloped and increased, but it went over what was a commercial area already. And they do have quite a few jobs there. And of course, they have I-90. And speaking of roads, I will agree that none of the major highways actually touch Sammamish limits, but it really isn't that long or far on several ways to I-90, 520, 202, and somewhat by 203 if you go over, Tolt Hill Road and those sorts of things. But so we do have some, accesses here. I appreciated Chair Boffman's comments on the political nature of economic development. If you've been listening to city council meetings, you've been hearing two sides of that equation going on right now. And I'm not casting any stones, I'm just stating facts. In the 2013 comprehensive plan scope of work, an economic development element was funded. It was worked on by an economic development strategic plan that actually started, well, maybe in early 2013 and 2014. But in early 2015, the rug got pulled completely. Never really a discussion why, but the economic development strategic plan got halted dead in its tracks, and there was no economic development plan, but yet there was a line put into the 2015 comp plan adopted in roughly October of 15 that there should be a future economic development element. So I concur. This is a very murky, choppy waters on this issue. But a brief repeat of some things I've said before, there are resources that, as Commissioner Boffman talked about, looking at other communities, I think our community should take a strong look at the market studies that were done for Town Center, one by the Town Center consultant and the other in 2009 by a 2009 a docket request, two different market studies. There was a report before Town Center got finished by a third party by the name of Chase Economics. The city of Sammamish hired a firm, Dukakis, to do a economic feasibility options in Sammamish and identified much interesting stuff. The work that was done in 2013 and 14 had a ton of information that is relevant, that would be important to consider and learn and use if appropriate and alter if appropriate, but it's there. There were two Port of Seattle economic grants in 2017 and 18, as I recall, and there's quite a bit of information there as well. To me, I've never heard if those things are being considered. I've said it 2 or 3 times at a couple meetings, so I don't mean to repeat to be a pain in the rear, but if it's not being considered, I think it should be, and if it is, I think it should be acknowledged that it has been. And about economic development and how it fits into things, I believe this. I believe it is step 4 of a 7-step process. Our community needs to figure out to what degree we have less of housing types we have oversupplies of. That is topic 1. And by the way, the development regs phase 1 and 2 did a significant reduction in the net gross yield via development regulation of single family housing. So that's well underway. Step 2 is to quickly add housing types the city has past and present shortages of. Step 3 is to sustainably plan for optimal balanced internal supplies, cycle of life, recurring generation. Then step 4, suitably sized, desirable and convenient economic services based on steps 1, 2, and 3. Then step 5, determine citywide transportation and transit systems based on steps 1, 2, 3, and 4. Then step 6, effectively manage and leverage wealth, benefits, and enrichments created by steps 1 through 5. And then step 7, only if needed, do major lane capacity road projects, which they well may not be needed because optimal land use and climate change and DEIB and suitable transit and complete streets and working from home will likely cause lane capacity projects not to be an issue. And even though we may grow in population, I believe strongly that we'll see less traffic impacts, far more revenue, better environmental outcome, fewer students, and a litany of advantages that are on the record in past documents, including achieving suitable housing balance over time and enrich, sustain, and stay. Appreciate the opportunity to speak. Have a good evening.
And we have no more hands raised.
I was assuming, but I thought I'd just double check. All right. Thank you, Paul. Anything else from staff this evening?
Yes, this is our last meeting before summer break. Woohoo! So I hope you all enjoy the last part of July and August. We will be back on September 6th with the joint meeting with the Parks Commission. And we look forward to seeing you all then. So have a wonderful summer.
I encourage everybody to get out and enjoy the best place to spend the summer on the planet. All right, thank you. Could someone move to adjourn, please?
Second?
It's been moved and seconded that we adjourn for this evening. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Thank you, everyone. We will see you in September.